Hi, folks. Eric from Hit Subscribe here. And for yet another week, I am soldering well beyond the point where I should probably have gotten a haircut. I'm not sure how long this is going to continue. I think I'm going to be doing 2 or maybe 3 more of these videos while we're here in Cape Coral. So it'll be a race between when we leave to go home and I have a regular person that cuts my hair and when I just can't take it anymore. We'll see what comes first. And that should be a scintillating race. But what I'm going to do this week, as I always do, is another installment of the, I was going to call it the Reader Question Roundup from back in the Dead Tech days, the freelancer Q&A, independent business owner Q&A that I do on this site. In this week's edition, I'm going to do one of the videos where I evaluate a niche idea from my backlog of niche ideas that readers sent in once upon a time. And this one is, I would summarize it as helping engineers grow skills and grow their careers on the job. The way the person writing in put this was, I'm very skilled in helping engineers grow their skills and career while on the job. I'd love to charge companies a monthly fee to help coach their early career engineers towards ways to grow faster, obtain skills faster, deliver more business value faster. So this is the niche idea, and generally the idea when people were writing these into me is I had written years ago a piece of content saying, it's pretty hard to describe how to go about identifying niches. So instead, it would be handy to do kind of a case study where people sent them in. You want to learn by pattern matching an example. And this is one of these examples. Now, I'll weigh in here shortly as to what I think of this. And I guess, to tip my hand a little bit, I feel like this would be a really, really hard way to earn a living. But I'll get into more about why I'm saying that here shortly. I just want to briefly say that I'm inferring. So first of all, this is, I think, kind of a noble sentiment here, to help. I want to help people develop in their careers. And I'm inferring that you, the question asker, if you're watching, most likely have spent some time working as a software engineering as a software engineer in a shop, and probably serving formally or informally in a mentorship capacity to people that were newer entrants into the workforce, more junior employees, if you will. So I'm guessing, if I had to read the tea leaves here, that what's motivating this is this idea that I've been pretty good at mentoring and helping folks over the years. I've helped them get up to speed a lot faster. That's valuable to the employer. These people are upskilled. I enjoy that. I really like helping people. I really like the mentor role, etc. So I want to remove myself from the corporate organization and do this kind of as a service, as a independent. And so the question there is, do I think that this would be a viable niche? And I think compared to just about everyone I've evaluated so far, I have the hardest time seeing this being a viable niche, even though it comes from a good place. And even though you're probably doing something that is economically valuable, I just cannot imagine this being offered as a service. So let me start out, I guess, with maybe some quick holes to poke in this and then kind of get more into detail. And I've been taking this kind of loose structure with these where I start to kind of dissect them by saying, what is the value proposition, the ideal customer profile? How would you market this? How would you sell it? So I'll get into that stuff and kind of try to tease along maybe some ideas for something that would be more viable as we go. But first and foremost here, the challenge that I see in establishing a practice like this would be, what is it's not clear who's receiving the value in this situation. So the arrangement that you're proposing, as I understand it, you would charge the company a monthly fee to essentially act in this mentorship role. But the way that you've framed this is you're going to help the engineers. You're going to help them grow. You're going to help them upskill. So you're charging one party for services that you will render to a slightly different party, with the understanding that both of those parties would benefit from the services. Now, this makes sense if you've always been within the corporation and you're all employees and you're all kind of working together and each picking up an oar in the common good. But it's a little weird when you're outside of the company to say, I'm going to sell my services to the decision maker that's, maybe a director or something like that. And then I'm going to turn around and make the customer these individual contributors within the organization. So the first thing is and I'll go more into this here shortly, but it's pretty murky as to what the dynamics of this is, like interpersonally, like you're selling something to one person. And usually, even if there is a different end user than the person you make the sale to, the decision maker, usually you're talking about this in terms of the value that will be realized by the person handing over their wallet. So if you were talking about, let's say, training the employees, then the value learned by them or realized by the manager would be the skill in which you train these employees. They're now more proficient so they can get whatever done faster. But the way this is explained is kind of hand wavy in terms of the value that the company receives. The only mention of that is so-called business value coming faster. And that's pretty unclear. You're much more focused on the value received by a party that is not paying for the services. So usually if somebody is like going to hire, say, a career coach or something, or like, help with salary negotiation, that can actually be kind of zero sum or adversarial with the employer. So that's one thing, is that you're kind of subtly teeing up, charging one party for another party's benefit. Another immediate and obvious problem that I see with this is the argument that I would make as a manager is, why would I outsource career development of people that I want in my organization for a number of years? That's very much an internal concern. So meaning if I were hiring entry-level folks with the idea that I wanted to upskill them and develop them and that they would work for my organization for a long time, it would be really weird to outsource that development. Why wouldn't I either bring you on as an employee that was a senior manager, mentor, whatever, to these people? Or if I didn't do that, surely somebody would be managing them. Why wouldn't that person be mentoring them? So there is a question of whether this is an appropriate function to outsource from the business. And I think you could make a pretty strong case that it isn't. And then even if you could outsource this, why would you? Why is this different than what a senior engineer on the team might do, or a team lead, or an architect, or their direct manager? There are all manner of people within the company that could fill this sort of role. Why double pay for it to an outsider? Why bring an outsider into the mix at all? So those are some of the biggest problems I see with this right off the top is why outsource this? What would you be doing that the organization itself couldn't do with people that they already have on staff? And then why kind of the sale to one party and then treating a different party as the customer, and that might be that the two different parties could just be in how you're phrasing it, not necessarily what you have in mind. But I do think that's important, because you need to understand, if you're selling this to the director or the VP or whoever, that's your customer, not these people that you would be mentoring. That would be sort of like a collateral action or something. And that's why I frame it more as training, because mentorship starts to be more of a benefit to that individual. And the mentor-mentee relationship from a career development perspective only makes sense for the company to subsidize if all of those people are going to stay within the company, which is the goal, that sort of retention and career development. It doesn't make sense if a company is not going to want to pay for a bunch of development of somebody who does that for a year or two and is like, hey, thanks for all this upskilling anyway, I quit. By even if like individuals might want to do that and it's a nice and respectable thing to do, there's no incentive for the company to do that. And when there's a purchase like this, especially I don't imagine you're going to be doing a ton of these at once, so they're going to be expensive. And when you're talking about an expensive purchase, the person you're selling it to, even if they have the economic authority to make the purchase, they're going to have to go and justify this to other people. And I'm having a hard time picturing somebody in an organization explaining wanting to buy your services to somebody else and the reaction being anything other than why. So I think you would have a hard time, even if you could convince a person that you were awesome, the scheme would sound kind of weird internally to anybody explaining it to anybody else. And you need that not to be true. So let me deconstruct here a little bit. One thing that you're going to always need when it comes to positioning a service or a product or anything really is a value proposition, meaning you are asking for money, you're asking somebody to become a client of yours, and you should be able to articulate a return on that investment to them of some kind or another. So if I'm running a department and you're saying, hey, if you pay me, I'll come in and help with the career growth of the people in your organization, you should be able to explain to me the value proposition, like what's in it for me. So from the most mercenary perspective, if I'm the director of this department or something, and I'm asking you, what's in this for me? Okay, so you make Susie and Steve and Bill and whoever better at their careers, I guess, and maybe better at software engineering. What does that get me? What's in it for me? Now, there is an implicit idea here, and I imagine this is pretty passionately believed by a lot of individual contributors, which is that upskilling is always going to be good for the business because you get better and faster at what you're doing. So it's a no-brainer, always upskill. Now, I've written about this on my blog, and I think subtly this isn't actually true, that the most value from upskilling tends to be realized by going from incompetent to competent, and that quite often you start to experience a pretty serious pattern of diminishing marginal returns on additional skills once you get beyond kind of minimal competence to get the job done. I'm not saying there aren't situations in which somebody being highly skilled isn't valuable. I'm saying I don't think that those are nearly as common as we all believe. If you are making a living as some kind of like app dev body shop banging out forms over data applications, it honestly really isn't very important for anybody there to be a super skilled software engineer. So as the director of this department, I might look at this and say, there is a point beyond which you teaching people the finer points of design patterns and this and that and the other, that it isn't clear to me that that actually helps us ship anything faster or that it results in any kind of better outcomes or certainly monetary outcomes for me. So your value proposition here is a fairly weak and murky one, which is, you pay me and I'm going to perform a service for someone else, and that service will improve them in some way that benefits you, dear customer. And that's indirect and unclear and probably hard to write case studies about. So what you're going to need right out of the gate is something stronger than, I help the individual contributors in your organization with their skills and their growth and so on and so forth. If you were to, so one thing that does get sold all the time is training. So if you were to come in and say, instead of, I'm going to help the folks in your organization grow and deliver business value faster, if you said, I'm going to teach them to do something that they up to this point have not been able to do, I'm going to teach them how to use this particular IDE, I'm going to teach them how to use this particular stack, and then they will be able to do something that previously had eluded you. Now you're starting to get into somewhat more valuable territory. There could be other value propositions here related to mentorship and career development and growth. So for instance, let's say that you had a morale problem of some kind, for instance, and I'm reaching a little bit with this, but if you had a bunch of earlier in their career, kind of lower paid folks, and they just, were self-serving or taking courses on Pluralsight or something to learn all of their skills, that could be sort of demoralizing if they didn't feel that they had any guidance. And then maybe you come in and you work with them and you correct this situation. So you give them some guidance, you give them a sense of direction, you make them happier. Now you're not really solving a business value delivery problem, you're solving a morale and retention problem, and that could be valid. And that would be a clearer value proposition than what you've been talking about so far. So really, I think in terms of the value proposition, you would need to start to look at the act of mentorship, especially as I'm inferring if you were coming from a company where you were performing this. You would have to start to deconstruct this and ask how it benefited the company, and then start to focus on that benefit to the company. So it's the same activities, it's the same mentorship and coaching and whatever. But at the end of the day, was the company better for it, and why? And how so? Did they retain their employees longer? Were you able to get the employees able to do something that provided a concrete dollars and cents type of benefit to the company? So another thing that you're going to need when you're thinking about marketing a service, or really, I guess, marketing anything, would be your ideal customer profile. So basically, from an organizational perspective, what kind of companies buy this service of yours? Now, some of this is going to be implied in the coaching itself. So who's going to buy this? Well, one thing you know about them is they're going to be large enough to have multiple software engineers working for them, and large enough to be able to bake hiring some kind of morale consultant or career growth consultant into their operating budget. So there has to be some size here. But the way you've teed this up so far, it's just anybody with software engineers on staff. And that's a pretty generic ideal customer profile. It's going to make it really hard for you to identify who you actually help. So one way you might be able to identify ideal customer profile with this type of offering is if you crisp up the value proposition a little bit, like, for instance, say the thing you're helping with is morale and retention. Well, now the ideal customer profile is going to start to look like people with morale and retention problems. If you're helping with some kind of specific training or instilling some kind of specific skill to a specific outcome, you could look for businesses that have engineers that lack that particular skill, or companies that lack that particular outcome. So as you start to get crisper on your value proposition, then you start to have a better answer to the question, who is your ideal customer profile? And then another thing I always like to be thinking about in terms of these niche ideas is, how would you market or sell this? And with what you've teed up right now, you'd have a really hard time doing it. So earlier I was talking about the objections that people would raise. Internally, it would be hard for anybody to make a business case for this. And those objections, why would I outsource this? Why am I not already getting this from my managers and, people on the team that are more senior, et cetera? You need to be able to get past those objections, and you need to be able to identify potential buyers in the first place to market to them. And that will be definitely served by firming up the value proposition and firming up the ideal customer profile. So if, for instance, we're talking about the example of morale problems, you're looking for organizations with a significant, engineering operation going on. They're going to be having morale problems, and those morale problems could be addressed by having a better mentorship program in place. And by the way, that, maybe is addressed not by paying a retainer for you to act as a mentor, but maybe you go in and set up mentorship programs using their existing folks in place or something like that. When you're identifying a niche, you're really trying to identify a need that exists in the market, a gap in the market, not so much what do you do and what's your secret sauce and what do you like. You would call that, I think, more of a specialty, and it's quite often the case that nobody really needs or cares about your specialty. So the niche really here is going to be the gap. And in this hypothetical I'm talking about, it's morale problems from a lack of a mentorship program in an organization. You might solve that by doing the mentorship yourself. You might solve that by installing some kind of mentorship program within that organization, et cetera. But once you start to do that, you can start to base your marketing, going and giving talks or creating content marketing. You can start to base that around recognizing morale problems, talking about the impact of morale problems, and so on and so forth when it comes to marketing. And then in your sales, you can walk through, the the kind of losses that companies would occur from this inefficiency, from having the morale problems and so on. You can say, if your engineers are unhappy, you're not getting nearly as much productivity out of them. They're going to turn over faster. It's going to damage your reputation in the hiring market and so on and so forth. So during sales, you can, kind of stress the importance of this service, and you can overcome the objections that people would have. So why couldn't we just do this internally? Your answer would be like, well, you probably would have by now if you could. I mean, I'm assuming you don't enjoy having morale problems, so as you tighten up your value prop, as you tighten up your ideal customer profile, as you start to understand more about what's motivating them and their problems and their needs, it gets easier to market to them and to sell to them. So another thing I've been doing with these types of videos is to kind of come back and say, like, all right, full circle, what are some ways that maybe you could riff on this or improve this niche? And I've talked through that a little bit here, but I think that really you need to dig a lot more into why somebody wants this. So if you take the salaried, employed mentorship kind of thing that goes on in organizations, what does that actually do that's economically valuable for the company? Is it primarily a question of retention and morale? Is it about upskilling? And if so, drill more into those specific skills and how those skills being obtained by the people in question benefit the company. So you need to start out figuring that out, figuring out what actual needs and profit motives these companies have, so that you can create a compelling value proposition to sell to the company, not to sell to the company in a way where you're going to help somebody else. But what does the problem that you solve do for them? So you establish that value proposition first and foremost. I help with morale, I help with retention, or it might be on the skill side, like I'm really good at getting entry-level folks upskilled in new things, which will give you a lot more like fluidity in your tech stack, or you don't have to be married to old legacy techs, because I come in and I help people get much more nimble about adapting to and picking up new tech stacks so that you can iterate on that without making entirely new hires, whatever the case may be there. So first and foremost, you've got to establish that value proposition. And that's going to really help a lot. That value proposition then lets you start to go out and recognize ideal customer profiles. So who is in need of that value proposition? Who is experiencing pain from not having it in place? What kind of pains would they be experiencing? How do you recognize those? Once you start to do that and you can identify that ideal customer profile who is in need of, or where this niche exists, who needs your value proposition, then you can start to have a fairly straightforward time marketing to them and selling to them, and then making or saving them money with your actual service delivery. And once you do that, you've got a better niche in place. So it's all really going to orient around doing some kind of deep diving into an activity, which is mentorship, that I think you've probably just been taking for granted as a good thing on its face. You got to get really, really clear on exactly why, how, and for who it's a good thing, and in what context is it like profitable for somebody to pay on top of their normal set of expenses to have that in place. And once you do that, you'll be on a path to hopefully taking that same set of skills that you have, taking that same set of activities that you like to do and find meaning in, and applying them in a way that will be economically valuable for your buyers. So, if you're watching, hopefully that's somewhat helpful. Or, it's been like 4 or 5 years, so maybe you already have made a killing in this line of work or something like that, figured all this stuff out. That would be great. But, for everybody else out there watching, hopefully this is somewhat interesting and helpful in identifying a niche, which is absolutely one of the hardest things there is to do out there. So hopefully that all helps at least some of you, and I will catch you. It's kind of a weird wave. I will catch you all next time, and I'll try to get better at waving at the end of the video. I went out on a very awkward note here, and I'm going to leave it there before it gets worse.